Hello and welcome back. My name is Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Welcome back to another weekly used gun review. Now guys, I have made a weekly used gun review studio here in my home, so hopefully I can get these videos out a little bit more often. I know I keep saying that, but I'm trying to find ways to get more space and figure out how to do more content for you guys lately. So here we go. Remembering the format of this video is we start with the most common and move through least common as the video progresses, starting us off with our first spot. Now here's a rifle that comes to us from a local customer. This is a Yugoslavian model 5966 SKS, and it's probably the most notable or most quickly recognizable SKS variant that is out there, mainly because of this grenade launching device here at the end of the muzzle. Now the story with this would mainly start in Germany in the 1940s during the Second World War with the development of the Sturmgewehr STG-44, STG-45, MP-43, MP-44. They're all the same rifles, and the earlier development iterations like the MKB rifles and so on. Now what that effectively was a pull for the German armed forces to move into what was going to be a select fire rifle that would be issued to everybody, made mostly of metal stampings, but most notably in an intermediate cartridge. And because I'm at home, I have more sort of random stuff to show you. This is a 7.92 by 33 millimeter Kurz, one of the first mass-produced, probably is the first mass-produced intermediate cartridge round. This is what was fired in the Sturmgewehr rifle. Now what you're going to notice is it is much smaller than the typical large cartridge type rifle that was used around the world during the Second World War period. This would be 30-06, 7.62 by 54R, 8mm Mauser, 303 British, and whatnot. The idea here is, and later this would be proven in NATO studies, is that most of your military engagements are happening between about 100 and 300 meters. Therefore, a full-powered rifle cartridge is not necessary for that type of battle engagement, so an intermediate cartridge allows the infantry to carry more ammunition, can have less recoil, more controllability, get a higher volume of ammunition in the air, and therefore have a greater likelihood of winning engagements and skirmishes at lower distances. They would take this philosophy and move into the Sturmgewehr rifle, which proved to be incredibly successful and would get the attention of other militaries around the world, most notably Russia. So Russia would start development through the early 19 to mid 1940s with an intermediate cartridge of their own, which they would land on the 7.62 by 39, which is the most popular, probably still the most popular military cartridge used around the world. It is what is most commonly found in the AK-47 or AKM pattern. Now Russia, through Simonov, would come up with a version, and again because I'm home I can show you this, of their own SKS rifle, which I have here. Now these would be manufactured by Ivzhesk for 1 year between about 1945 and 1946, and Tula between about 1949 and 1958. Now this is a Tula made in 1951. It is an all-matching example. What you're going to notice mainly here is just this standard muzzle here at the end, and it was a semi-automatic 10-round internal magazine-fed rifle chambered in an intermediate cartridge. Really cool philosophy and concept that again got the attention around the world because versions of this would be licensed and copied, like the Chinese Type 56, the Yugoslavian M59, the Romanian version of the SKS, so on and so forth. Now in Russia, in and of itself, it did not see a lot of military service because by about 1949 or so, you have implementation of the AK-47, designed by Mikhail Kalashnikov in 1947, which used the same cartridge but implementing a 30-round detachable box magazine made mostly of metal stamped parts. It's very easy to manufacture, cheap and quick to manufacture, easy to maintain, easy to train soldiers on, and was all over a better design. So in Russia, the SKS really did not see a whole lot of use. However, in other countries, it actually did, and Yugoslavia is one of those. So by about 1959, Yugoslavia was looking at moving into a new intermediate cartridge rifle of their own. Remember, they were using versions of the old German Mauser design in the 8mm Mauser, with the M47 and M48 using leftover surplus rifles from the Second World War and then later designing or manufacturing copies of the rifle themselves. This would be their first stab at an intermediate cartridge rifle, and they would land on this in 1959. It was largely a copy of the Russian design. It was licensed for manufacture by Russia. And by 1966, they would go through several arms design, or several changes of the firearm itself, most notably by adding a grenade launching device to the end of the muzzle with grenade launching sights and a gas cutoff valve here. incorporating most of the other features. Now, the original 59 was not chrome lined like the Russian version, but other than that was mostly identical. This would actually stay in service through Yugoslavia longer than most other countries through about the 1990s. Now, although the M70 would come out in the 1970s, which was Yugoslavia's version of the AKM, again, the 5966 would still be used in service and was widely phased out in the 1990s. That is about when you start seeing a lot of the surplus 5966 and 59 rifles coming onto the U.S. market, where you can find a lot of them today. Now, most of the 5966s are in pretty good condition. Most of them are matching, and they're going to hover in about the $400 to $600 range, depending on condition on what they come with. So again, a very affordable option, very robust, beefy rifle, tons of fun to shoot, very reliable, just overall really cool rifle. So anyway, that is going to start us off in this video with the Yugoslavian 5966. All right, guys, in our number 2 spot today, we have a firearm that comes to us from a viewer in Ohio. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is a Czechoslovakian VZ61 Scorpion. More specifically, this is the VZ61 imported by Checkpoint USA, manufactured by Czech Small Arms in the Czech Republic. Now, the story with this would actually begin in the 1950s with arms designer Miroslav Rybar, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, who was looking at coming up with a new offering that was going to be intended for special operations use. Now, remember, at this time, submachine guns, quick deployable stamped metal firearms like the MP40 have been used in mainline military use. But through about the 1950s and through the 1960s, the doctrine on these would change to more of a special operation use or ancillary, sort of back second line of defense type of application. Now, this would be one of the first that would come out. Remember, this would predate the MP5, which would come out in the 1960s. This would go into development in the 1950s, landing on this design in about 1959. Now, its first design iteration was dubbed the Model 59, but would see further development, and this exact package would be landed on in 1961, where it was given the name VZ or Vizor, meaning Model 61 Scorpion. Scorpion because it had an iconic wire stock that folded over the top of the firearm with 2 protruding ears here around the barrel. I will roll in a picture, which you could slap open, it would swing open, and you would have a pretty usable and quick deployable shoulder stock. Now, this does not have that, again, because this is a civilian handgun or pistol variation, non-SPR. And so, of course, you can SPR them, but this particular one is just in handgun configuration. Now, the VZ61 was chambered in .32 automatic. It would typically be issued with 3 magazines, one 10-round and 2 20-round magazines, with the 10-round inserted and fit into a leather carrying case or holster with the 2 20-round magazines on deck. This was so that it was easy to carry, and then you could quickly deploy it. You could use your 10-round magazine in an emergency, and you had your 2 20-round magazines that you could switch to if you were in a situation that warranted more firepower. Select fire, awesome little firearm selector switch over here on the side. Now, mainly made of metal stampings, it was cheap and easy to produce, and actually for its size was pretty lightweight. Now, when it was adopted in 1961, it would go into full-scale production in 1963. Now, again, originally intended for special operations use, airborne units and things like that, the Czechoslovakian military would quickly take note and realize that it could be used in a lot of different applications as well. This would actually see wider scale use with about 200,000 units being produced and used mainly as a secondary sidearm for lower ranking officers, used with vehicle drivers, clerks, mechanics, more ancillary behind the main line type roles, where you might not have a job of carrying around a full-size rifle like a VZ58, where you could have a lot of firepower on board and ready to go at a moment's notice. Now, remember, this type of application is new at the time, and this would sort of springboard the world into looking at small, compact submachine guns that would fit in these types of roles. Again, we get into the MP5s, the UMPs, the BNTs. So this is one of the first ones to sort of usher in the era of the new special purpose submachine gun or machine pistol type of philosophy. So really cool design. Now, through the 1960s, they would come out with different variations of this pattern in different calibers. Again, this was the 61 and .32 automatic. They had the 64 and .380, the 65 and 9x18 Makarov, and the 68 and 9mm. Now, the latter were not really produced to any meaningful amount and never really leaving prototype stage. However, there are civilian versions in the 9x18 Makarov and the 380 that are available through Czech Small Arms. Manufactured through Czech Small Arms and ported through Checkpoint USA. You can get them with threaded barrels, without threaded barrels, and new they're about in the $800 range. Now, these were used, again, with special operations purposes, with suppressors and stuff, even through their military application. So you could get suppressors, if you get a 9mm can, these are actually pretty quiet, pretty cool little firearms. Now, they do make good SBR projects. The original ones had a dovetail milled into the rear of the receiver. This does not have that, again, because it's a civilian version, but there are 2 pilot holes here in the back. You could take out these set screws, and they do sell an adapter plate that goes into the back with a dovetail in it, and you can use that to put on a traditional standard VZ61 stock, again, with all SBR NFA rules applying there. File for your Form 1 before you do that. They do come with a sort of polymer stock. You can get surplus wood stocks like this pretty cheap, $10 or $15, and they're easy to thread right on. So just a really cool little firearm. Again, on the market today, brand new for the civilian semi-automatic versions, you're at around the $800 mark. Used, you might find them in the $600 or so mark. So very cool firearm. Very happy to get this one in and share it with you guys. Big thank you again to our customer in Ohio. All right, up next, we have an interesting firearm that comes to us from a local customer. Big thank you for selling us this one. This is the Irma ET22. It is a 22 LR copy, if you will, of the famous German P08 Luger, which was standard issue in Germany in the First World War and also saw implementation and use in the Second World War as well. Now, if we look at the beginning of the history of this firearm, we have to look at Irma, which is Erfurt Maschinen, established in Germany in 1922 by Bertolt Geipel. If we look at what's going on in the world of small arms development, in the interwar period, there is a lot of interest in development of new submachine guns. Now, submachine guns had been tested with, evaluated, and implemented in the First World War, most notably by Germany and the United States. Now, in Germany, we have Heinrich Vollmer as well as Hugo Schmeisser, who are at the forefront of submachine gun technology. Now, when Erfurt is established in the early 1920s, they would actually license and purchase some projects that had been designed by Vollmer and use those to come up with the Erfurt machine pistol, or the EMP, which was a 9mm fully automatic submachine gun feeding from a box magazine loaded through the left-hand side of the firearm. Had a very long, iconic shroud with a vertical wooden hand grip. I'll roll in a picture for you guys. Now, these were meant for the German military and civilian markets. They saw mostly use in the German civilian market, not really being adopted militarily at this point, again, interwar period. However, they would be adopted in Spain through a licensed copy. Now, through the 1920s into the 1930s, there's further development of submachine guns, of which Erfurt would get in with production of the earlier variations of the MP38 as well as the MP40, which were used in the Second World War. Furthermore, Erfurt would have licensed copy of the K98 Mauser, so they were heavily involved in World War II small arms production. Now, like a lot of other companies, in Germany that were using or that were manufacturing military equipment, they would employ slave labor, of course, through the Holocaust and other labor camp and POW war programs that they had going on. So through the commencement of the Second World War, like a lot of other Nazi Party affiliates, Bertolt Geipel would be arrested by the American forces and sent to prison. Now, through about the mid to late 1940s, he would be released through the completion of a re-education or denazification program, which he would complete and then be allowed to resume back with his business operations, however, not geared in firearms. Now, his original plan of military production would actually be shut down by the Soviet occupational forces in Eastern Germany, so he would relocate his factory to Dachau, just outside of Munich. Now, his son would be involved with the company at this point in time. Geipel is getting a little bit up there in years, would actually die in the 1970s, but through that they would actually begin with the Erfurt production of household appliances and things like that. Now, when the Bundeswehr is established in Germany, Germans, localized military formation, Erfurt would be awarded production of, I should say contracts for the production of replacement firearm parts, most notably for U.S. military equipment that is going to be used with, military police and things like that in the Bundeswehr. Now, one of their first actual full-on firearm production models that would actually later come out of that was a 22 LR version of the M1 carbine built for German police training purposes. Now, when the 1960s, when the American commercial market is ramping up, Erfurt would start to come out with other sort of clones or copies of different firearms that were previously popular for target practice and for, the commercial firearms market enthusiasts and things like that. So they would come out with versions of like the Walther PP and, of course, the Luger. Now, in 1966, they would come out with the LA22, which was the standard 4-inch version copy of the Luger and 22 LR. And in 1967, they would come out with this. Now, again, they would dub this the Navy Luger. This is quite a bit longer than the Navy Luger, with about 11.2-inch barrel. Again, more commonly representative of the DWM Luger carbine, which had about 11-inch barrel with a wooden fore-end like this and a shoulder stock, which this does not have, and does not have the lug attachment point for the stock. Erfurt would stay in production with these types of firearms until about the 1990s, when they would actually go out of business and be acquired later, actually finally by HK, and they no longer exist today. So a pretty interesting sort of point in the era of, Luger collecting. I know really not a military service Luger, but, a lot of diehard Luger collectors and enthusiasts do like to add a commercial Erfurt 22 Luger somewhere to their collection, just because it is part of sort of the Luger history. So anyway, there is that very interesting firearm on the market today. Depending on condition and what they come with, they go anywhere between about $500 and $800 or so. So anyway, very cool. Happy to get this one and share it with you guys. That is the Irma ET22 Navy Luger. Okay, up next is a pretty interesting pistol that comes to us from a local customer. So big thank you for selling this one to us. This is the FL Selbstlader, which was actually an ancillary secondary use military sidearm that was employed by the Germans in the First World War. Now, not a lot of people are familiar with this handgun. A lot more people would be more familiar with the gun in which this copied, which was the FN Model 1900, which looks very similar, but there are a couple subtle differences that I will go over. Now, the story with this would actually begin in the 1840s with the founding of the Langenhahn Arms Company in Germany. Now, there was a family of gunsmiths headed up by a family member, Frederick, so Frederick Langenhahn, who would come up with a company, and they would make a lot of sporting or enthusiast type firearms, single-shot rifles, pistols, and they would actually secure a military contract with the Saxon Army with a copy of a Smith & Wesson revolver. It was a model 1872, I believe, or somewhere around there. It was an 1870s model, and that one was designed by Frederick himself. Now, after Frederick's passing a few years later, his son Herman would take over the company, and they would move into design production of, again, sporting firearms and also bicycles, which was actually very common practice at the time, that a lot of arms manufacturers, this included FN, by the way, would actually make bicycles as well as firearms. Maybe there was a lot of commonality in the tooling required to make both. I don't know. There was definitely demand for both, and maybe that's why. But that is what they had been involved in. Now, prior to the onset of the First World War, Herman's son Fritz would actually tinker around with a scaled-up design of the FN Model 1900. Again, as you can see, this takes a lot of similar design cues, namely the recoil spring being mounted above the barrel, which is here. But in this case, it had a removable breech block held in place by a screw at the rear of the slide, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. It fed from a detachable box magazine holding 8 rounds, straight blowback as I mentioned. Now, there are a couple different variations of this pistol. This is a slightly later one. The earlier ones are known for having a cutout here in the ejection port. The sort of slide here reciprocates back and opens up that ejection port, but earlier ones have that area cut out, I guess, for earlier extraction. Maybe they realized that they didn't need that, and thus would reduce the necessity for further machining by just leaving that intact. Now, when the First World War would kick off, Germany, like a lot of other countries, would realize that it needed a lot more arms production and arms manufacturing. Mainly, they had adopted the P08 German Luger, but they did not have enough to supply everybody in the field with a sidearm, especially lower-ranking officers. So they would go out and look for other options in order to fulfill those contracts. The Langenhahn Company had submitted this for approval, and it was officially adopted. So about 55,000 of these would be made. I don't believe all 55,000 were used within the German army, but I do know that some would see police use. These would go on to serve in German police service after World War I, and these did also turn up in the Second World War as well, again, as firearms were needed. Now, getting back to the weird sort of separate breech block, there is a screw here in the back. Now, this one is actually finger loose. It was that way when I got it. You would really want to crank down on that and make sure that that is in there tight before firing the pistol, because once this action screw is removed, you can lift up on this yoke, push the slide slightly forward, and then the rear action block can actually come right out of the back of the pistol. Now, if during firing, if that screw were to come out and this yoke were to lift up, which as you can see would be very easy to do under recoil, what is going to happen on the subsequent round is this breech block is going to fly back into the shooter's face. Now, while you're shooting, you can keep an eye on this screw and make sure that it's there between shots and that it's not loosening up. But I understand that this was a military combat pistol. You don't always have the luxury of checking your equipment between shots if you're in a stressful or in a situation where you need to be able to just unload your magazine quickly without, having to worry about anything else malfunctioning on the firearm or your firearm hitting you in the forehead. So kind of a weird and clumsy design, and because of that, if people have the choice between an FN model 1900 or a pistol like this, typically they would go for the FN 1900. I can push that back together, get that back into alignment, push that back down, and the action screw will just thread back into place. And of course, again, you would want to crank that back down. So this pistol, although it did see service in Germany in the First World War, a lot of collectors, I should say, a lot of advanced collectors probably know what it is, but most sort of enthusiasts don't. So there is not a huge consumer or, a lot of interest in purchasing these on the consumer market as a military sidearm, but they are still rather valuable for what they are, just because they are uncommon. This one's in excellent condition for the time frame. But just a really cool design. In this condition, a pistol like this may be somewhere between $600 and $800 or so. Again, not too commonly found on the market, but also not a whole lot of buyers for them. So anyway, very interesting pistol. Very happy to get this one in and share it with you guys. This is the FL, or Frederick Langenhahn Self-Slatter 32 automatic pistol. Okay, up next we have yet another one from a local customer. It's kind of a local special today. This is an original IMI/Action Arms Uzi Model B. I'll get this out of here real quick. Get back with you. Kind of cool to have the original box. Okay, the civilian semi-automatic version of the Uzi made by IMI in Israel. Okay, if we take a look at the Uzi and its development, we can really go back to the 1940s when Israel was declared an independent state. Now, ever since then, they have been in a constant state of war, and there has been a necessity for Israel to be at the cutting edge of military technology and development. And the Uzi is a real prime example of that. Now, following World War II in Israel, a lot of the Israelis and the IDF, their Israeli Defense Forces, had been supplied with post-World War II technologies. This is like captured firearms from Germany, K98s, MG34s, MP40s. This is some military aid from the United States with M1 carbines, M1 Garands, M3 grease guns, Thompsons, and things like that. Now, after the Arab-Israeli War in 1948, the IDF would put out a solicitation for a new compact submachine gun that was going to sort of usher in the new era of sort of PDWs, personal defense weapons, submachine gun, special use and operations type SMGs, like we mentioned earlier with the VZ61, was around that exact same time period. So that is the direction a lot of militaries are moving. Now, Uziel Gal would answer the call for this solicitation in 1948 to come to the IDF with this, the Uzi 9mm open bolt select fire submachine gun. It was mostly made of metal stampings. A lot of this inspiration taken from things like the MP40. Had a grip safety here. The magazine was fed into the pistol grip here. Again, as mentioned, firing from the open bolt. It used a barrel collar, a lot like the Sten submachine gun, so barrel changes were pretty easy. Most interestingly enough, it incorporated a telescoping bolt and barrel design, so the bolt sort of telescopes over the barrel, allowing this package to be very small. And at the time, the original one was about maybe this long. At the time was definitely the shortest and most, compact SMG at the time. Now, this would go into trials in 1950, and by 1951 was officially adopted, and by 1954 was in full production and supply with the IDF. It would actually stay in supply with the IDF up until the early 2000s, when it would be replaced by the Micro Tavor. So a very large, steeped military history here. Now, it would get its baptism by fire in the 1956 Suez Crisis, and has since, been in various conflicts around the world. Really interesting design. So in the late 1970s, there is starting to be this opening on the U.S. Consumer market for interest for these types of firearms. There's interest for things like AKs, Steyr AUGs, things along that path. So IMI would create an export version, the Model A, which was actually militarily identical to the IDF Uzi, except it would fire from a closed bolt with semi-automatic only and had a 16-inch barrel. Now that would come into the United States through about the 80s, and that would cease production or cease importation, I should say, in 1989 with the George Bush Sr. implementation of the importation ban on non-sporting firearms. That was following the Stockton schoolyard shooting in California. Now, during that time through the 1980s, they would come out, as I mentioned, with the A model. A model is a direct copy, again, of the military Uzi, save for those features I talked about. Then they would have a B model. The B model had adjustable rear sights as well as a firing pin safety, so negated the risk of slam fires and things like that, and this is a B model. There would be other domestic manufacturers like Group Industries and Vector here in the United States that would manufacture Uzi, semi-automatic Uzi carbines off of Israeli parts kits. Those you can still find on the market today as well. Dorenko had a copy also, but the sort of most collectible and valuable versions to most people are these Israeli manufactured and Action Arm imported versions of the rifle or the carbine. You have a sheet metal stock that opens up just like the real one does. Your release button is here. And then again, 16-inch barrel, but you could SBR these things and get an actual military barrel. And as simple as it is, by removing this barrel collar, you can swap that out for a traditional barrel again after you file your Form 1 or do that sort of thing. People had taken these in the 80s prior to the 86 machine gun ban and registered bolts and receivers, making open bolt SMGs, which are available on the market today. But again, those are going to be very expensive as transferable machine guns. As a semi-automatic carbine like this in original configuration with its box, this is an okay condition. There's some rust on it, some pitting on the barrel, but again, these barrels are easy to find and can be replaced easily. Some pitting on the trigger. This looks like it got some moisture to it. Something like this is going to be in about the $2,000 range. So anyway, very happy to get this one and share it with you guys. That is the IMI Uzi Model B. Okay, last but not least, I have yet two more from a local customer, so big thank you for selling these to us. These are very iconic rifles. This one here is a SCAR 17S, and this one here is a SCAR 20S, both of these chambered in .308, 7.62 by 51 millimeter NATO. Now, the story with these would actually begin with the United States military in the year 2004 with SOCOM, which is Special Operations Command. Now, they were looking for an adaptive combat rifle that could be used in a multitude of different purposes for specialized military application, again, through SOCOM, obviously. What they wanted was something that could take the role of multiple different elements within a fighting force or a squad. For example, the squad support weapon, the infantry rifle, and the designated marksman's rifle, sort of rolling all of those applications into one standardized platform that everybody could be issued. So you have parts commonality, interchangeable magazines, and ammunition. Now, through that program, FN would enter pretty much this rifle. It would be in two different variations, which would later be adopted as the Mark 16 and the Mark 17. Now, the Mark 16 was chambered in .556. The Mark 17 was chambered in 7.62 millimeter NATO, also given the names the SCAR Light and the SCAR Heavy, obviously the light being the .556 and the heavy being the 7.62. Now, the .556 variant was meant to be a stand-in for things like the M4A1, the HK416, and other light weapons that were being used in Mark 18, things like that. Whereas the SCAR Heavy was supposed to be a stand-in for things like the Mark 11 and the M14 and the M240B and things like that. So again, they were officially adopted in 2004 and are actually still serving in more limited application with the United States military today. Now, through their adoption, there has been a lot of success, or a lot of, I should say, reference with these firearms in pop culture. So you do see the SCAR show up in a lot of different movies and video games. And because of that, FN would come out with commercial variants of the 16 and the 17, keeping in their original military form, except not select fire, and with 16-inch barrels, making them, civilian legal for the public here in the United States. Now, the 16 S would be the civilian version of the Mark 16, chambered in 5.56, and then the 17S is the civilian version of the Mark 17, which is chambered in the 7.62 NATO. Now, later through the adoption of the SCAR program, FN would introduce a new rifle, which would be adopted also by SOCOM, used today known as the Mark 20 Mod O SSR, and SSR standing for Sniper Support Rifle, which is this. So you have a 20-inch barrel rifle, adjustable gas port here at the front, just like on the original 16 and 17. You can interchange the barrels out if you want to switch them over to the 6.5 Creedmoor, which they offer this in now. So in 2018, FN would come out with the civilian version known as the 20S, which is what we have here. So this is your SSR, again, special purpose support sniper rifle, or DMR designated marksman's rifle. So you have that there with full-length rail up at the top, chambered also in 308 for military application, using the same magazines. Now you do have on here a adjustable stock, which is pretty cool. You have adjustable length of pull here in the back, an adjustable comb for your height. It's actually a really, really cool system. Now, furthermore, when these were released, they were released in black and flat dark earth. The black flat dark earth having sort of the 50 shades of flat dark earth option. So you had all these different sort of variations of the flat dark earth on the rifle. Within about the last couple years, they released this multi-cam Cerakote, which is a factory offering. A little bit more expensive, but kind of a cool, different variation. So these are relatively new. Also with the charging handle on both sides of the rifle, and is now no longer, or has non-reciprocation. On the market today, the MSRP of this exact version is sitting around $4,300, and on this one is sitting around $5,000. On the open market, brand new, you're going to find them a little bit cheaper than that. But still, they don't make, FN doesn't put out tons of these things, so sometimes they are out of stock for certain periods of time, and you have to wait for them to come back in, but the market's kind of quiet right now, so they should be easier to find new. Used, it's hard to say. Something like this, maybe the $3,000 range, something like this, and the kind of mid to high threes, maybe low fours, somewhere around there. So anyway, very cool rifles. Really good one to end this video out on. A couple SCARs, 17 and a 20, and the newer multi-cam Cerakote. All right, well, that is all the time I have for you today on this video. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking this video out. If you enjoyed, please hit that like button, and please consider subscribing to this channel and hit that bell notification button so you are aware when we are putting out new content. If you have any questions, leave those down below in the comment section. Guys, I'm going to leave you off there. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.